Okay, so here we are. Let's go ahead and jump right into our cleanup with the healing brush and the clone stamp and remove any sort of little distractions and inconsistencies and texture problems. I'm going to start with the healing brush on the skin. And now Katie has a slightly different skin texture than Keep. So we have a couple more texture problems, a couple more skin problems, so I'm probably going to spend a bit more time on the cleanup here than I did on Keep. Okay, so let's get started with some of these issues. So here it's really important for me to stay conscious of what's a freckle and what's, a scar or a blemish. And fortunately, in this case, I'm pretty aware of what's what simply because I've retouched Katie so many times. And I've seen her in person so many times, so I pretty much actually know the layout of her face by heart. Now, if you're working with somebody whose face you know so well, then that's really great. If you don't, don't hesitate to ask them about something. For example, this might look like a freckle, but if I'm not completely sure and I don't know whether to remove it or not, I just ask her and she would tell me that that's actually a scar that she hates. So there it goes. Super quick. Okay. Over here we have a little bit of a hair. So I'm going to remove that, and I'll also remove this blemish. If we're working on a bit of a gradient area, such as, this gradient from light to dark over here, it'll be easiest to remove something sitting right on that gradient from another spot that is equivalent in that gradient. So I just picked it from a little bit above and then went right in there, if that makes sense. Same with these spots over here. And then we also have a couple of sort of fine lines going across her forehead. So with those, we want to carefully remove them with a brush size that is perfect for that exact line. We also have a couple of tiny little specular highlights that can go pretty quickly and easily. And as you can see, with the healing brush, it's not super important that we constantly work, with a sample point that's right next to the point that we're trying to remove. We can even work from a little bit further away and the Smart tool will still do its job, especially if we're working with, tiny little brush strokes. At that point, it's really not super important because it's not very destructive. I want to leave a couple of these hairs as I think they look nice and natural. I just wanted to remove the distracting ones, remove this one down here as well, and then I'll get to that in a second. Okay, this side of the forehead looks pretty good to me. Here is the before and after so far, before and after, and that looks pretty clean. Okay, let's move on to this bit up here. Now this is a little bit difficult because it's sitting in this transition area right in between where we have some specular highlights. As you can see, these are more white highlights, more shiny, and then here they're less shiny. So we'll want to make sure that we remove this with some sample points that will make it look like it's part of that natural transition. So I'll remove, some of it from this side, some of it from up here, and then perhaps remove some of that texture from over here. And this is the before and the after. And that looks pretty natural to me, but we can always come in with some dodge and burn later and help even that out a little bit more. Okay, moving on to a couple of other areas. Once again, my focus is just going to be to keep the brush size as small as possible for these little lines and other little spots. Now, if we have any problems such as around here where we have a little bit of redness, that's not something that we should really worry about with the healing brush. That's something that we'll want to fix in color correction, especially as long as there's no texture problems involved. So if there's no texture, totally ignore it and we'll fix that later. Alright, so here I'm just kind of moving through and trying to be as efficient as possible while, giving a lot of attention to detail, as of course, once we move into local dodge and burn, we only want to deal with the larger scale issues. Okay, that looks really clean to me. Here's the before and here's the after. And as you can see, it's really smoothed out a lot of that, and at this point we really only have, sort of medium and large scale transitions left to worry about. Okay, let's continue moving. I'm going to skip over the eyes and just kind of go around the face. Maybe I'll start over here. And out of focus areas are usually pretty easy to tackle, not much to worry about there. Down here I'm sort of trying to discern what are freckles and what aren't. So Katie's freckles are a little bit more yellowy, so if I see, for example, some of these darker lines coming through, I know that those probably aren't freckles. those are probably just skin transition problems. Same thing down here, these are some, little magenta patches, so those are most likely little blemishes as opposed to freckles. If we're dealing with edge issues, it's a really good idea to sample directly from the edge right above, and then kind of, anchor that sample point since we're working with aligned, and just sort of fill in anything surrounding that area, and that cleans it up really well. Before, after, super clean. Okay, let's keep moving. There's a little dark spot right there, little blemish, a little light spot. Some of these spots could be, taken care of with Dodge and Burn, but since they're out of focus, there's not a lot of skin texture that we need to preserve, and it's significantly faster to get these size spots with a healing brush real quick, especially in those out of focus areas. So that's something that I like to do once in a while. As we're coming through here, we can also take a look at the lips. In this case, they have a couple of little chapped spots, so I'm going to try to remove those. That works pretty well. And then we can even consider sort of bringing some catch lights onto those areas, as those would naturally fall up here. Okay, so here's the before, and here's the after. There we go, much more smooth. Okay, let's take a look at the chin. Any sort of outliers around here. Once again, we're getting these weird little lines, and since they're out of focus, I'd prefer to remove them with the healing brush instead of with local Dodge and Burn. So here's the before, and here's the after, and there they go. I like to think the more time I spend here, the less distractions I'm going to have to deal with when I'm doing my local Dodge and Burn. So I'm usually pretty patient with my cleanup, and I actually really enjoy this step. So yeah, I don't know, I hope you can kind of dig it. Okay, now I'm coming up on the other cheek, and I'm going to remove a couple of hairs over here, and next up remove any skin disruptions or anything else that might be distracting. Up here you can see pretty clearly the difference between a bit of a blemish and a freckle. The freckle is super flat and a little bit more yellow, and with this blemish you see a little bit more sort of shape and dimension. I know that's sort of a weird thing to talk about, but I think it's really important to be able to differentiate them, so just sort of try to look out for that texture. Don't forget, we're not just here to remove the spots that are too dark, we're also here for outliers that are white spots. But once again, the entire cleanup process is extremely subjective, just like any other step of retouching, so it is entirely up to you what you consider to be distracting and what not. You could technically come through here and leave all of this intact and maybe only remove the 1 or 2 blemishes instead. It's really entirely up to you. Let's take a quick look at our progress. Here's the before and here's the after. And as you can see, we're just kind of removing a lot of these little outliers that are distracting. And there they go. Getting around to the last couple right around the nose here, and then I think we can move on to the eyes. As you can see, it's really incredibly helpful that I have my brush in aligned mode because I don't need to do any resampling here. All I can do is just press little dots onto the spots that I want to remove, and they're all kind of going with the same sample point, so that makes my life super easy. With issues like this around the nose where we have a little bit too much texture, in this case it's from skin dryness, we want to make sure that we're sampling from an area that has way less texture. So in this case I'm sampling from a skin area that has no texture or way less texture, so over here, and then I'm just kind of removing some of those outliers and just trying to smooth this out a little bit so that it is not distracting. Again, I'm almost just kind of tapping the little spots that I find to be the most distracting, and they're going pretty well with this aligned mode. Okay, so here's the before and here's the after, and that's been smoothed out quite a bit, and of course we do kind of have to deal with a bit of a tone transition here still, but we'll do that later with local Dodge and Burn. Okay, so that's it for the skin for me. Let's take another quick look. Here's the before and the after up here, and down on the bottom of the face we have the before and the after. So let's take a quick look at the eyes. I want to do some cleanup of the makeup around here. So we have just a couple of specks of makeup that are just all over the place that should not be around there. We got one in between the lashes here on the eyelid, and that's a little bit difficult to remove, so we might actually want to tackle that with the clone stamp instead. So I'll try to stamp from an area that is color accurate and similar to that, so maybe around here. It's a little bit too light, so as long as we feather it on kind of carefully, that's okay. Okay, back to the healing brush to remove some of these little specks. And we can also clean up some of these brow hairs if we want to. Okay. So we do have a couple of lashes that are coming into the eye. I'm going to remove those. Once again, totally up to you if this is, something that you want to take care of or just leave. Lastly, we have a couple of lashes coming into this iris up here, and also the catch light. So we might want to carefully remove those because that's a little obstructive. So that looks a lot cleaner already. Let's take a look. Before and after. Okay, cleaned up a whole lot of messes right there. Let's take one more look at the clone stamp tool to remove that little section of that eyelash. Okay. So at this point, I want to go ahead and fill in the lashes a little bit with the paintbrush. So first, I'll sample one of the lash colors, of course. Somewhere right around here looks good. And then I want to go through a little bit of trial and error for my brush settings. So I might just, paint on a couple of fake lashes here to test and play around. We can use pressure for opacity, we can use the airbrush settings, and we can also turn on the shape dynamics if we'd like to. And that might help us, create a bit more of a natural looking lash shape, something like this. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. Might sample a slightly darker color. Okay, so something like that. And then when we're painting lashes, we generally have to consider we're not trying to get them too perfect because that won't quite look right. So I'll try to paint a couple at a time, and I'll have them sort of crisscross a little bit and intersect. Some should be shorter, some should be longer. The most important thing is just not to get it too perfect. Might even have to go up on the flow here. So something like this, and bring in some clusters like that. Now you might not be completely comfortable just creating these shapes from scratch, in which case I want to mention that there are third-party brushes available that already have, the right shapes. If you are painting eyelashes, I know I've said this a million times, I would probably recommend taking a look at a couple of makeup tutorials first. Okay, while I'm here, I'm also going to carefully fill a couple of these little gaps in between the actual eyelashes that are looking a little bit too bright and sort of disrupting that shape for me. So I'm just going to be very gentle with that. And then let's take a look at our before and after. Here's the before and here's the after. And that comes together really nicely. Now, if there are any other outliers that we want to remove, now's a good time. I'm going to do this with the clone stamp since we're getting into small scale stuff here and we don't want to get in the way of our lashes. Okay, I'm going to do some of that filling in on the bottom side as well. Okay, and that looks good to me. Here's the before and here's the after. That is so much cleaner. I'm super happy with that. Okay, let's take a look and see if we need to do anything with the eyebrows up here. Now, in regards to the eyebrows, we can kind of do a little bit of the same thing if we'd like to. We can pick one of the darker colors and just fill in a couple of hairs here and there. And once again, we want to be very gentle with this, but I figure, while we have these brush settings, might as well fill in a couple of additional hairs. Once again, we don't want these to be too perfect, so kind of go crisscross, go a little bit of the wrong direction, hairs naturally go all over the place. Okay, there we go. Here's the before and the after, and that just nicely sort of evened out that shape. So let's go ahead and move on to the other eye. This one is going to be considerably easier simply because it's out of focus. In this case, I'm also going to fill in just a couple of hairs, even though we don't really need it here. And then I'll get around to cleaning up these lashes. First with a healing brush, get any of those outliers. Now I'm going to switch to a clone stamp to figure out some of these more difficult patches, especially where this hair was coming across, and try to make sure everything is smooth over here. And then I'm just cleaning up any other lash problems that I can find. Okay, I think at this point I'm ready to add a couple of eyelashes in, so I'm going to sample this color, and then I'm going to try to find the approximate thickness of this out of focus lash and try to replicate that. Let's see how well that goes. Actually, it goes pretty well. So in this case, of course, do make sure not to have your lashes too thin, as you know, that would make them look much too in focus for this particular area. So we want to match that level of depth of field. Okay, so for this eye, here's our before and here's our after, and that looks so much more even. If we need, we can also fill in a couple of bottom lashes. Might want to be a little more gentle there, maybe around 30% flow instead. Something like that. Okay, cool. Just to fill in those little gaps, and that's wonderful. I'm going to finish up with any other peripheral items, such as stray hairs and so on, and I'll just speed through that right now. Once again, here I'm removing the outermost flyaways that are bothering me with the healing brush, and if you prefer to go at this with the clone stamp and remove more of them, then that's totally fine as well. Okay, so here's the final cleanup, before and after. And at this point I'll see if I want to remove any excess off the edges of the frame that I for sure don't want in any versions of my crops. And in this case I'd say, you know, maybe we can remove a little bit off the top. So perhaps right around here feels more balanced to me. Okay, that's it for our cleanup that we did with the healing brush and clone stamp and worked with the paintbrush a little bit. Before and after. Before and after.